were a really great crowd. This was a wonderful crowd to watch this film with. And we were just discussing how beautiful I think the print looks. And it was really
It really is a different experience watching it on 35 millimeter. Even the aging of the print kind of adds a nostalgic factor.
I mean, it's like I always say, films live lives, just like, we do. So I had the pleasure a couple of months ago of meeting Susan after a screening of Making Mr. Right here. Which is so great, and seeing like Lori Metcalf again, and it's just she's so divine. And I knew that Susan's book was coming out, and I was fortunate enough to get this advanced copy, which I devoured in about 2 days. And I emailed Susan about how important it is and how wonderful it is, because I feel like so many of us in creative positions are desperately seeking something. And to get this full spectrum of what life can be or life through your eyes is comforting. And so I want to thank you for that. And so to start off the question of when did you want to make the book? Was this like a...
Yeah, I think what motivated me was a couple things. One was COVID. Suddenly there was the pandemic, and I had a lot of time. We were all in lockdown, and I had a lot of time alone with my thoughts. The other thing was that sadly in the very beginning of COVID, Mark Lung, who's so wonderful, passed away the second week of the lockdown. So that was really sad. So that makes you think, when somebody passes away, it just sort of, just makes you think about that journey. And the other thing was, I think around that time I was 68 or 69, and 70 was on the horizon. And there's a great quote by Leonard Cohen that I once heard where he said, 70 is the foothills of old age. I didn't feel old, but I was just aware, I think I was aware of my mortality. And of course that was also because of COVID. So I just thought for so many years, and I've been, working in film since, my student short films in the 70s, but that's 4 decades ago. And often it's been other people looking at my work, critics or journalists writing about what they thought I meant or how they interpreted what I did. And I just sort of felt the urge to kind of tell the story from the inside looking out, to say, this is why I did this. This is what my intention was. This is why I wanted to show these kinds of characters, because that really has been kind of a mission for me, to try to tell stories about women that I hadn't seen on film before, especially starting out in the 70s.
Well, I mean, did everybody get a book? I know everybody gets either got a book or get a book, but it's hard because I want to talk about it, but I also don't want to spoil anything. So I'm going to skirt around some things, but I do love that we have this screening because the book is called Desperately Seeking Something.
Yeah.
And this tie you have to Susan's. And there's Susan and there's the Susan sort of in the book. So I want to have the rest of our talk be about Desperately Seeking Susan, but sort of within the framework of your book.
Yeah.
And I want to know sort of what the Smithereens, your first film, is very independent DIY, and this is a slightly bigger production. And I wanted to know what that transition was like from going to something that's so bootstrapped and so to then something that was kind of magical,
Yeah, well, there is a real connection between Smithereens and Desperately Seeking Susan. I mean, my kind of goal was to try to put characters on film that we hadn't seen before, but I wasn't necessarily interested in making stories about traditionally nice women or, again, back when I was a kid watching movies in the 50s and 60s, women were very much in boxes. Good girls, bad girls. In the movies, the bad girls died or went to prison, and then we had all those great women in prison movies. But,
that is true.
I wanted to tell stories about women that were complicated and that were both good and bad without judging them. So, in Smithereens, the character of Ren, for those of you who have seen Smithereens, is sort of like I'll rephrase it. The character of Madonna, of Susan, is kind of like a more charming version of the character in Smithereens. And also, the worlds are not that much more different. I mean, Smithereens is way grittier, but Desperately Seeking Susan is sort of a magical version of that same kind of world. But yet I knew that world. I mean, I had lived in the East Village. I went to film school back then. NYU was on 7th Street and 2nd Avenue, and it was pretty funky back then. So I thought I would be really nervous going from an indie film to a studio movie, but because I knew the characters and I knew the world, I actually felt comfortable. And I also, luckily, had very supportive producers, 2 women who had never made a movie before, and I had a female writer, and also the other clubs like Ed Lockman, who's now quite famous and wonderful. This was his first studio movie, but we were on the same page, and same with Santo Loquasto, who had done the costume design for some early Woody Allen movies, but in this case he was both the costume designer and the production designer, which was great because he had a singular vision. Yeah. It was actually kind of a funny thing because the production was low budget and we couldn't afford to hire a good costume designer and a good production designer, so we got a great person, 2 for the price of 1 kind of thing. But it worked out really well, and I think the other thing was that we had this kind of unified vision of trying to almost make it like a Alice in Wonderland story. When I think of this story, I think of Rosanna Arquette as the Alice character. Susan is the white rabbit who leads her down this rabbit hole into another world. So that fairy tale or magical element was, part of the story and part of the production design.
Let's talk about Roberta and Susan and about your interest in portraying women difficultly, because this is a film very, very early on that centers and focuses on 2 women. And especially Roberta is going through this transition from what you would stereotypically want her to be to her true self. I just would love for you to talk a little bit about the importance of that to you, and was that difficult? Because I know this film was a success, and this is the first time that, maybe these kind of stories were like, hey, audiences will come see them, which I think is really important and groundbreaking.
Well, again, the idea of doing a female friendship story, or, in the 80s there were a lot of guy buddy movies. So I kind of think of this movie as almost, it's a female love or infatuation story, but without the sex.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I related strongly to both those characters. I grew up in a middle-class suburb outside of Philadelphia. I could have been Roberta. That was at least where my parents thought my life was going to lead. but yet there was some part of me, like when she, one of the shots I love is when she, it's her 30th birthday, she looks out across the bridge and she sees this other world, the possibilities of being somebody else, or this other world, and hear Tom Newman's amazing, magical, tinkling score. That's how I felt growing up in the Philadelphia suburbs, that, this is nice and this is great, but there's something else, over the rainbow that might be more vibrant or, more interesting. So, I grew up, I could have been Roberta, but yet I had left Philadelphia and I was living in the East Village and I was going to film school and I knew that world too. So there was some part of me that identified with the Susan character as well.
You mentioned in your introduction about New York being a character of this movie and also in some of the readings. And I'll say in the book you state that you lived in the same apartment for 35 years and you have very interesting stories about, a New York that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But is, I think for a lot of us who live here, we miss it. But it seems like you were conscious of New York changing while you were making these films. Do you see this as being sort of like a documentation or a time capsule of that time?
Well, I think all my films, it's so interesting because I guess the 3 projects I worked on that were very much about the city came at different time periods. Smithereens, which came out in 1982, but we actually started filming it in 1980 when New York was coming out of the bankruptcy crisis. So it was pretty gritty. Then Desperately Seeking Susan was about 4 years later, and the city was getting it wasn't gentrified yet, but it was changing. It was cleaning up a little bit, but still kind of funky. And then it's interesting because I did the pilot for Sex and the City in 1997, and New York is different again. I say it in the book, but probably Ren would have hated the New York of of Sex and the City. But even that, when I come back now, because ironically, I make fun of New Jersey in a lot of my films, and I am now a Jersey girl. Life is weird, and it's nice. But even now, coming back into the city, it's amazing. I lived on Thompson Street between Houston and Prince for 35 years. There's a lot of changes just in the 7 years I've been away.
Yes.
So I think that's the magic of New York, is that it does keep reinventing itself, sort of like Madonna's career.
Yeah, I don't know what rock I was living under when I realized that Madonna wasn't famous when she was cast for this film. And, I sometimes feel like there's, magic in making movies, and that coincided with this, phenomenon of culture that she became to be, and how interesting that is, because you talk about she was just able to walk around and no one was bothering her. But I know it could be complicated as well.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I had never experienced anything like that before. I mean, when the first shot that we filmed was actually the shot where Susan, the character Susan, is walking down St. Mark's Street eating cheese doodles. She's wearing a low white glove, she's eating cheese doodles. And, we had the film crew was there were lights, there were trucks, but no one was really paying much attention because no one saw any movie stars.
Yeah.
So, we would be filming, somebody would stop, look, but that was the end of that, really. And then over the 9 weeks that it took us to film, I guess her Like a Virgin album was about to break, and suddenly, her career skyrocketed to the point where by the end of the shoot, we really needed security guards to keep people away. I could never have predicted that. But certainly it helped with the distribution of the film, because I don't think the film would have gotten as much attention from the studio had that not happened. But another funny thing happened, which was when we originally, I think there was like a 4 or 5 month post-production schedule, which is kind of typical. The amount of time you need to edit and put in the music and the effects and the titles and all that. And the studio, Orion, had us rush it to condense it down to a 3-month, I think it's about 3 months, post-production schedule, because they were afraid that Madonna's star would fade. Because back then that's what happened. You know, somebody got very famous very quickly, and then 2 months later, goodbye. So
jokes on that.
Yeah.
Fast production time. I just want to talk about Rosanna Arquette in this film, because I just think she's so luminous and fantastic in this film.
Yeah.
Do you, like, looking back on it and watching it now, how do you receive her performance?
I think she's amazing. I mean, she has so many just little facial quirky things. Her expressions, her face is so alive and animated, and she's so sympathetic. And I don't want to go into all the details of the book, but it wasn't always an easy relationship between us. I think in part because, when we started the film, she was clearly the star. She was this up-and-coming...
She had just made After Hours, right?
After Hours hadn't come out yet, but she had filmed After Hours. But she had done a movie called Baby It's You with John Sayles that got some attention. She had been in a very interesting TV series called Executioner's Song, based on the Norman Mailer book, and gotten attention. So she was clearly a rising star in Hollywood. I don't think she expected what was going to happen with Madonna to happen, and suddenly, the press and everyone started calling the movie, or referring to the movie as the Madonna movie, and Madonna was wonderful in it.
Yes.
But I think that maybe had took its toll a little bit on Rosanna and on my relationship with Rosanna, and without going into details, I do talk about that honestly in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to age myself either, but like 40-something years after this film has been released, I think that we can remove some of the Madonna mania from it and really appreciate the performances.
And they're both wonderful because they're both so different. They're kind of a softer and cooler version of a character, and I think that combination really works.
I mean, I also just love Aidan Quinn.
She's amazing. But not just, Aidan Quinn is amazing, but I think what was wonderful is if you, there's so many really interesting cameos. It was just a great time.
Like John Turturro.
I don't think they've done a movie. There's like a tiny little thing with Giancarlo Esposito, who's now, he's just the guy selling sunglasses on St. Mark's Street.
Yes.
Stephen Wright, the comedian whose career was about to take off. Laurie Metcalf. She's amazing. So there were those up-and-coming actors, and at the same time there was also, because having made Smithereens and lived downtown, I kind of knew who the downtown celebrities were, So there's little cameos of all these downtown musicians, whether it's John Lurie or Arto Lindsay or Richard Edson. They're all kind of peppered in there.
Yeah.
And there's also somebody else that I didn't talk about in the book, but I should have. When I was in film school, I had no female film director role models, because there weren't that many American women, or women in general. A few in France.
Yes.
But the one film director that really inspired me was a woman named Lena Wertmuller, who I thought was amazing. I thought she was amazing because she was so bold,
Yeah.
and she made a bunch of films. Often you'd find a film directed by a woman and then they would disappear.
Yes.
But she had a body of work, and I so respected the fact that she did. And she made a movie, I remember, I think it's 1975 or 76, called Seven Beauties.
Mm-hmm.
Shirley Stoller, who was the star, she plays the concentration commandant, is in this movie. She plays the jailer who lets, that is Shirley Stoller from Seven Beauties, and I wanted to work with somebody who had talked to Lena Vermeer. 2 degrees of separation. Yeah.
That's incredible. My last question before I open it up to the audience is you mentioned that at the end of shooting this, you finally felt like for your occupation, you could say, I am a film director, despite making short films, despite doing smithereens. And I guess I want to know, what was it about this film or this experience or this time that was finally like, this is good?
Yeah, I think, it's funny because when, Smithereens went to the Cannes Film Festival, and I remember going through, in the airport, when you go through customs, or not customs, you go through the checkout, whatever. They give you a card and it says occupation. And I didn't know at that time, I was there coming back from the Cannes Film Festival, but I couldn't write film director. I kind of felt like I wasn't sure what I was. I might have put down film student or something. I didn't know what to put down. And I remember the second time I was in Cannes, which was with this, when I had to fill out occupation, writing down film director and suddenly feeling like, okay, that is what I am. And I don't know, whether it was, I guess maybe to some extent you have to kind of fake it till you make it. And, but it was this film that made me kind of feel comfortable acknowledging or owning that I was a film director.
I love that. I would love to open it up to the audience. If you have any questions, I believe we'll have a microphone go to you. I can't see anyone who's like, if you want to raise your hand.
I have a question.
Yes, here you use the mic.
You mentioned the costume person who did the set and everything, but I was wondering specifically about the jacket and how that process happened, deciding on what the jacket was going to be, because it was so pivotal.
Yeah. Well, we knew the jacket was going to be symbolic of the exchange that one woman, the vehicle to allow them to exchange identities. Santo Loquasto, as you can probably see, a lot of the costumes some of them are from Madonna's wardrobe. You see her, she's wearing a short cut-off t-shirt that says sweatshirt that says MC on it. And she's sitting outside in the Magic Club, and Santo wisely went to Madonna's apartment at that time and looked through her closet. But what I heard was that he had this idea for this jacket, which is kind of like a waiter's tuxedo jacket, and that she didn't like it in the beginning. And it's funny because that jacket is so associated with her. But I think when she first saw it, because it was different than the other kinds of clothing she used to wear, it took her a while to get used to it, and now I can't imagine. To me, that's just the Madonna jacket.
Of course, yeah.
And the other thing, working with Santo, that we wanted to do is that the color scheme needed to be very different for each of the characters. So if you look at even the interior decoration of Rosanna Roberta's house, it's all pastels. When we see her, she's in a hair salon in a pastel smock. All her clothing is sort of beige and pastel, which fit that color, that character, as opposed to the Madonna world, which was much more vibrant and, she wore a lot of black with vibrant colors.
Yes.
As was Ed's lighting.
Yes.
It was soft for the suburbs and it was colored gels for the city.
Yeah. Any question? There's two hands in the middle. You'll get thanks.
Hey, kind of loud. All right. I noticed like a big Jackie Chan mural in the apartment. What's the story behind that?
Sorry, I didn't.
You noticed the
Just like a
Jackie Chan.
huge Jackie Chan mural. Like, what's the story behind that?
Oh, I don't know if there's a story, but I love it.
Yeah.
I think Santo just wanted to paint, again, the idea was, in that scene, Roberta is she's beginning to enter this other world. It's the first time she's entered this alternative wonderland. So I think the idea was to just sort of add visual elements that just made it so different than the suburban house she came from. I don't know if the Jackie Chan poster had a significant...
It's cool, like, it's sort of like a dream, I would like to have a Jackie Chan mural and then like tons of film cans.
He works, he's a projectionist at the Bleecker Street Cinema. Yeah.
So I just kind of want to go back to what you were talking about, because I feel like across all your work, your use of color is so deliberate, and color is very important. And I think we're at this weird stage where color is not important. I was just wondering if you have thoughts on where film is now and use of color and why it's so important to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer the question where film is now. I mean, film is in a confused place right now between streaming and so few, so many movie theater chains no longer existing, and people, watching movies on iPhones and everything. It's a different world than, when I was busy working. But the use of color and the use of fashion. I mean, I started out thinking I was going to be a fashion designer. That was when I was a kid. That's what I went to college for originally. And the reason is because I think that clothing, and that includes the color of the clothing, can tell a story with very few words. I mean, I'll use an example from Smithereens, if any of you have seen it. It starts on, when the frame opens, you just see a woman in fishnet stockings and a black and white check vinyl miniskirt. You don't even know who she is. And you see a pair of black and white check sunglasses, and it takes place on the subway. And you see her sort of, you see her spotting her legs, you see her approaching this pair of sunglasses, and she's going to snatch them because they kind of match her skirt. So it tells you a story without having to have dialogue or a lot of exposition or narrative. In this, when you see Roberta again with the smock, the peach smock, and a very feminized environment, you kind of get an instant impression about that character because of the colors. And then you see Madonna, when we first see her in black and white fishnets with the jacket in a very garish, brightly colored Atlantic City hotel room. Again, the fashion and the art direction tells you what you need to know about that character. So it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut.
What's so interesting about Roberta too is even when she's using Susan's clothing, she's making it her own. She's not like showing her belly or anything. She's making it work for herself.
Yeah, exactly. I when I worked on Sex in the City, again, because fashion is such an important element of that, I realized that how we dress and how we, what we choose to put on is a way of presenting ourselves to the world. It's how we want other people to look at us, how we're expressing ourselves, how we think about ourselves too.
Yeah.
So again, you know, it's all about narrative storytelling, and clothes tell a story.
Another question?
I have a question.
Sorry, they had the mics going on, so they'll
Is this on? Oh, I have a question, Susan. You're the Magic Club in Desperately Seeking Susan and the club in Gaudy Afternoon. There's sort of a similarity there. What's your fascination with those kind of
With
seating
magic?
clubs? Yeah, magic. Seating
I
clubs.
believe in magic, but I also just I like environments that are a little gritty and also have a mix of elements. I mean, the Magic Club here, it's sort of like, you know, when I think about the characters in a movie like Broadway, Danny Rose, you know, weird ventriloquists and, you know, a geriatric band. And to me, just those kinds of, that kind of diversity is interesting. And the concept behind this Magic Club was that it would be a little bit retro, so it's a little bit punk, but it's also a little bit like a 50s mobster thing going on there, and it has magic, and I think that that's what, you know, movies are kind of about. You know, movies are magic.
do you have the mic? Oh, you got it, good.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful little candid seeming moments in this. So I'm just wondering how much you adhere to the script, how much improvisation, or how much you work for the scene to get that sort of feel of calamity and spontaneity.
Yeah. The story is in the script, and this is a heavily structured script. There's a lot of, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. There's a lot of pieces. But I believe God is in the details a little bit. You know, so to me, as a director, what I can bring to it is all those little details that go beyond the storyline. And to me, that's kind of where the fun is. You know, I do like making movies where someone could see them for the first time and they're watching the story. Then they can see it for the second time and they notice, oh, look at the number on that hotel room. You know, what does that mean? Or they can notice, you know, just some little quirky thing in the background that you might not have seen the first time. And that, it's those layers that interest me.
I think, Roger, we have time for how many more?
Yeah, take two more.
Two more.
Two more good ones.
No pressure.
No pressure, you guys. Yeah, there's one in the back, and then I see someone right in the middle-ish. Do this
Hi.
as last.
Yeah, hi. So you touched on this already a little bit when you said that you kind of thought of this movie as a love story. But I just wanted to ask, I think in 2024 it's like very easy to read queerness into the relationship between the characters, and I just was wondering if you would speak on that.
Bad hearing. The queerness in the relationship, but I didn't hear, that's the only part I heard. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, now I can.
I was just wondering how you thought about that at the time, or if watching it now that strikes you differently. Yeah.
No, but it doesn't strike me any differently. I think that, you know, I have always had girl crushes, not necessarily sexual ones, but I am very interested, or I've had fascinations with other women, with their lives. I've wondered what it would be like to be them. I think that's kind of a universal feeling, whether you're straight or queer or whatever. I mean, the idea of kind of being interested in your relationship with somebody else and what their life must be like. So to me, that was the quality that I wanted to bring out, the theme that I thought was really interesting. And I think that that is just as valid today as it was back then. And, you know, I think it's a universal, timeless theme.
I wonder what their relationship is like after.
Sorry?
What their relationship is like after.
After this?
You know, like that might be where that question comes in.
Well, there was a scene that was cut out of the movie. At the end of the movie, there was a scene where we see the two women in Egypt. Off on an adventure together. There was a scene that we shot in a sand pit in New Jersey. And we brought in camels. We brought in two camels, and you kind of see Susan and Roberta sitting on camels, and you know, there's sand all around them, and we were going to put in a pyramid, you know, in the background. And what happened was we had a preview screening and realized that the film just had too many endings. Sure. And so we ended up cutting out. There was also another scene where the two guys, Jim and Des, are sitting in a bar wondering where the women have gone. They've clearly, they're drinking beers and they're wondering what happened to the women. Then we cut to the women and they're in Egypt. And it just felt like they were just, the film was going on too long. And then when I realized that, you know, I love movies and I love the magic of movies, and I kind of thought ending it in a movie theater, especially with a little bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that they're watching a movie and the screen, the film burns, that it was a kind of meta statement there. And that was the end. It just felt like the end.
The last question?
I was just curious if you could talk for a second about what it was like when you found out that the film was selected for preservation from for the National Film Archive.
Yeah. I was so happy, you know, because when you make a movie, you just never know whether it's going to pass the test of time. I mean, we were really surprised. This was a little movie that was made for under $5 million, and no one had any high expectations for it. Of course, when Madonna's career skyrocketed, the studio got excited, but you still never know whether there's going to be something about it that it has a story or a theme or characters that are going to resonate over time. And for me, what has been incredibly wonderful and interesting is actually to watch the film with an audience that I know was not born when the film was shot, and that they get the story and that they still relate on some level to the characters. So that was an honor that thrilled me.
Go ahead.
You want to say anything, Roger? We all good?
No, thank you for being here.
Thank you.